It started with a storm, literal and metaphorical. That Friday night, lightning splintered across the sky as I pulled into our driveway. The headlights illuminated Jessica standing by the front door, drenched in rain but not moving to come inside. She looked startled, like a deer caught in a car's beams, clutching her phone like it was her lifeline. I rolled down the window. "Jess, what are you doing? You're going to catch pneumonia." She didn't respond immediately. Her eyes darted to the car, then back to her phone. She fumbled with something before finally slipping it into her pocket. Her smile, when it came, was too quick and too bright, like someone slamming a door on something they didn't want seen. "Oh, I was just waiting for you," she said, shivering as she climbed into the house after me. Waiting for me? Since when did Jessica ever wait for me outside in the pouring rain? She wasn't the sentimental type, and I wasn't stupid enough to think this was a romantic gesture. Still, I brushed it off, convincing myself I was overthinking. But that was the first red flag, the one I ignored. Later that evening, while Jessica was upstairs changing, I went to grab a drink from the fridge. That's when I noticed it. Her car keys, lying on the counter. Hanging off the ring was a sleek new fob, one I'd never seen before. Curiosity got the better of me. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands. It wasn't for her car. Our modest sedan didn't need anything that fancy. My mind raced. Did she rent something? Borrow a car from someone? I knew better than to ask her directly. Jessica hated feeling monitored, as she put it, so I did what any reasonable person would do. I pocketed the fob. I didn't think much about it until the next day when I saw her slipping on heels I hadn't seen before. Bright red stilettos, the kind of shoes Jessica always said were impractical and trashy. "Nice shoes," I commented, leaning casually against the doorframe. Her reaction was off. She froze for a fraction of a second before laughing. Too loud, too forced. "Oh, these? I got them on sale months ago. Don't you remember?" No, I didn't remember, because she didn't buy them months ago. "Where are you going all dolled up?" I asked, my tone light but my insides churning. "Just meeting Karen for lunch," she said, grabbing her bag. She didn't realize Karen had texted me earlier that morning, asking if I could recommend a good dog groomer. Lunch clearly wasn't on her agenda. I waited until she left, her heels clicking against the pavement, before grabbing the fob and heading out. It wasn't hard to figure out which car it belonged to. Parked 2 blocks away was a sleek black Mercedes I'd never seen in the neighborhood before. My hands were shaking as I clicked the button. The lights blinked. It was hers, or at least she had access to it. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the faint imprint of her red lipstick smudged on the driver's seat headrest, as if someone had kissed it. I stood there in the rain, the wind howling in my ears, staring at that car like it held every answer I didn't want to know. Something was unraveling, faster than I could hold on to it. And Jessica? She was at the center of it. For the first time, I felt like I was standing outside my own marriage, looking in at strangers. By the time Jessica got home, the Mercedes was still on my mind. I'd spent the afternoon pacing the house, replaying every odd moment from the last few months like a reel I couldn't shut off. The unexplained late nights, the sudden interest in her appearance, the way she clung to her phone like a lifeline. When she walked through the door, the rain had started again, and she was shaking out her umbrella with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hey, babe," she called out, tossing her bag on the couch. I stepped into the living room, arms crossed, trying to act casual. "How was lunch with Karen?" Jessica froze for a beat, barely noticeable, but I caught it. "Good. We went to that little place downtown. What's it called again?" "Oh, the Green Fig." She rattled off the name like it was rehearsed. Karen had posted a picture of her dog on Instagram an hour ago. The caption, "Lazy Saturdays at home." "Sounds nice," I said, keeping my tone even. "What did you get?" Jessica blinked. The pasta. The one with the mushrooms? You'd love it." She was already walking past me toward the stairs, clearly eager to end the conversation. But I wasn't done. "Funny thing, Karen texted me earlier," I said, testing the waters. "She didn't mention lunch, Jessica stopped mid-step, her hand on the banister. Slowly, she turned to face me, her expression shifting into something hard, defensive. "What are you saying, Tyler?" Her tone was sharp enough to cut glass. This was how Jessica operated, turning the tables before I could land a hit. "I'm saying," I replied, taking a step closer, "that you're lying to me." Her eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought she might actually deny it. But then, she surprised me. She laughed. Not a nervous laugh, but one of those condescending chuckles that made my blood boil. "You're being ridiculous," she said, shaking her head. "Karen probably forgot to mention it. Why are you acting like a jealous teenager?" "Because I saw the car." I wanted to say it right then, throw the evidence in her face and watch her squirm. But I held back. I needed more. Confronting Jessica without proof was like stepping into quicksand. She'd twist everything around until I was the one drowning. Instead, I leaned against the wall, watching her. "I don't like being lied to, Jess. That's all." She didn't respond. Instead, she stormed upstairs, her heels clacking angrily against the wooden steps. The next day, I decided it was time to stop playing games. Jessica had left for her yoga class. Another excuse that had started popping up recently. I knew she hated yoga. She used to make fun of people who did it, calling it glorified stretching. Yet now she was supposedly obsessed with it, going 3 times a week. I waited 10 minutes after she left before grabbing my keys and heading out. I wasn't following her. At least that's what I told myself. I just wanted to see something, anything, that would explain the growing pit in my stomach. It didn't take long to find her. She wasn't at the yoga studio. She was parked in front of the Mercedes, talking to a man I'd never seen before. He was tall, dressed in a crisp suit that screamed money. As I watched from my truck, she leaned into him, laughing at something he said. And then it happened. He reached out, brushing her hair back from her face, and kissed her. My heart stopped. For a moment, the world went silent. The rain pattering on the windshield, the hum of the truck engine. All of it faded as I stared at them, frozen in place. Jessica pulled away, glancing around nervously, but the way she smiled at him afterward was unmistakable. It wasn't guilt. It was satisfaction. I clenched the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. My chest felt tight, my thoughts racing. The man got into the Mercedes and drove off, leaving Jessica standing there for a moment before she climbed into her car. I followed her home, staying far enough behind that she wouldn't notice. By the time she walked through the door, I was already waiting for her in the living room. "Have fun at yoga?" I asked, my voice steady but my heart pounding. Jessica froze, her hand still on the doorknob. She didn't answer right away, her eyes scanning my face for clues. "Yeah," she said finally, her tone light but her smile strained. "It was fine." "Why?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "Because I saw you, Jess. I saw you with him." Her face went pale, and for the first time, I saw something other than confidence in her eyes. It was fear. "Care to explain?" I asked, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. For once, Jessica had no quick comeback. The silence between us was suffocating. Jessica stood there, frozen in the doorway, her expression flickering between shock and calculation. I could almost see the wheels turning in her head as she scrambled for a way out. Finally, she stepped inside, closing the door with deliberate slowness. "I don't know what you think you saw," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "But it's not what you think." I laughed bitterly, the sound foreign even to me. "Oh, it's not? Because I saw you, Jess. I saw you with him. Laughing, kissing." My voice cracked, the words burning as I forced them out. "Don't you dare stand there and lie to my face." Her expression hardened, and just like that, the fear disappeared. She crossed her arms, the corners of her mouth curling into a smirk that made my stomach churn. "You've been spying on me? Following me around like some psycho ex-boyfriend?" I shot to my feet, unable to contain the anger bubbling inside me. "Don't turn this around on me. This isn't about me following you. This is about you." Sneaking around with some guy in a Mercedes while pretending you're at yoga. She flinched at the mention of the car, but recovered quickly, her smirk replaced by mock indignation. You're out of your mind, Tyler. That man? He's just a friend. A colleague. We were discussing business. Business? I snapped, my voice rising. Did this business involve his lips on yours? Or were you negotiating something else entirely? Her eyes blazed with fury now, her hands clenched at her sides. You know what? Screw this. I don't have to explain myself to you. I've put up with your insecurities and your stupid accusations for too long. Insecurities? I repeated, incredulous. This isn't an insecurity, Jess. It's reality. I saw you with my own eyes. Jessica stormed past me, tossing her bag onto the couch. You always do this, she muttered, more to herself than to me. You can't stand the idea of me having a life outside of you. God forbid I have friends or a career that doesn't revolve around your fragile little ego. My jaw tightened. Don't you dare make this about me. I've done nothing but trust you, even when things didn't add up. And now I see what that trust was worth. She spun around, her eyes narrowing. And what about you, Tyler? Huh? Always lurking, always suspicious. Maybe if you spent less time trying to play detective and more time actually being a decent husband, we wouldn't be in this mess. Her words hit like a punch to the gut, but I refused to back down. A decent husband? I repeated, my voice low and venomous. Is that what this is about? Justify it however you want, Jess, but we both know what's really going on here. For a moment I thought she might crack. Her gaze wavered, her lips trembling as if she was about to say something honest. But then, just as quickly, the mask was back. I'm done with this conversation, she said coldly, brushing past me toward the stairs. You're not walking away from this? I said, my voice sharper than I intended. Not this time. She paused on the first step, her back to me. When she turned around, her face was calm. Too calm. That's why my wife, who cheated on me with a married rich man 5 years ago, called me, she said, her voice dripping with venom. The words hit me like a freight train. What? I whispered, the air sucked from my lungs. Oh, you didn't know? She continued, her tone mocking now. Yeah, Tyler. That guy you're so worked up about? He's nothing compared to the one before you. You're not the first and you won't be the last. My legs felt like they were going to give out. She said it so easily, so cruelly, like she was taunting me, daring me to react. You cheated? Before we were even married? I asked, my voice barely audible. Jessica shrugged, her eyes gleaming with defiance. Maybe, maybe not. Does it matter? You're already convinced I'm the villain, so why not embrace it? I stood there, stunned, as she walked up the stairs without another word. The sound of her bedroom door slamming echoed through the house, leaving me alone with the weight of her confession. For the first time, I wasn't sure what hurt more, the betrayal I just uncovered, or the one I never even knew existed. Her words kept replaying in my head, echoing in the silence of the house like a ghost that wouldn't leave. 5 years ago, married man? Jessica had always been a master of cutting deep, but this wasn't just a wound. It was a bomb, and she detonated it without a flicker of remorse. I couldn't sit still. My heart was pounding, my mind racing with a dozen questions I didn't even know how to ask. What else didn't I know? Who the hell was I married to? I grabbed my phone, scrolling through my contacts until I landed on the name. Karen. If Jessica thought she could spin her web of lies without consequences, she underestimated me. Karen and Jessica had been friends since college, and if anyone knew the truth, it was her. The phone rang twice before Karen answered, her voice chipper. Hey, Tyler. What's up? I didn't bother with pleasantries. Karen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. There was a pause. Okay? What's going on? 5 years ago, was Jessica involved with someone else? A married man? The silence that followed was deafening. Karen, I pressed, my voice cracking. Please, I need to know. She sighed, and I could almost hear the conflict in her voice. Tyler, I don't want to get in the middle of anything. You're already in the middle of it? I snapped. I just found out. She admitted it, Karen. I need the truth. Another pause, longer this time. Finally, she spoke. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she said quietly. She swore it was over before you guys got serious. I thought she told you. My stomach churned. Who was he? Karen hesitated. Look, it was a bad situation. He was some big-shot executive. I think his name was David something? She met him at a conference. She said it didn't mean anything, that it was just a mistake. A mistake. That's what Jessica had called it? A casual fling with a married man while stringing me along like a fool? Why didn't you tell me? I asked, my voice rising. It wasn't my place, Tyler, Karen said, defensive now. I thought you knew. And honestly, I thought you guys were happy. I didn't want to stir the pot. Happy? Was that what we looked like from the outside? Because inside, my marriage felt like a rotting structure barely held together by duct tape. Thanks, Karen, I said curtly, hanging up before she could respond. David. A name to a shadow. It wasn't much, but it was enough to light a fire in me. I wasn't going to let Jessica get away with this. Not the lies, not the betrayal, not the smug satisfaction she wore like armor. I went upstairs, my footsteps heavy against the creaking wood. Her door was shut, but I didn't bother knocking. I pushed it open, finding her sprawled on the bed, scrolling her phone like nothing had happened. She glanced up, annoyed. What now? I threw the name at her like a weapon. David. Ring any bells? Jessica's face flickered, just for a second. A crack in the facade. But then she rolled her eyes, setting her phone down. Oh, so now you're digging up ancient history? Real mature, Tyler. Don't you dare dismiss this. I snapped, stepping closer. You cheated on me before we even got married. With a married man, no less. And you had the audacity to throw it in my face like it was nothing. Who the hell are you, Jessica? She sat up, her eyes narrowing. Don't act so high and mighty, she said, her voice venomous. You weren't exactly a saint back then, either. What are you even talking about? I demanded. Flirting with your ex at our engagement party? She spat. Texting her behind my back? Yeah, I knew about that, Tyler. But did I throw it in your face? No, because I actually tried to move on. I stared at her, stunned. You're seriously comparing a couple of texts to a full-blown affair? She shrugged, her expression icy. Cheating is cheating. Maybe you didn't sleep with her, but you crossed a line. So don't sit there and act like you're some kind of victim. Her words were a knife twisting in my chest. Was I perfect? No, but I'd never betrayed her trust like this. You're unbelievable, I said, shaking my head. This isn't about me. This is about you and your choices. Own up to it for once in your life. Jessica stood, her face inches from mine. You want me to own up to it? Fine. Yes, I cheated. Yes, it was with David. And you know what? He treated me better in 6 months than you have in 6 years. Her words hit like a sledgehammer, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. You don't mean that, I said quietly, my voice breaking. She laughed. A cold, hollow sound. Don't I? Maybe if you weren't so busy playing the perfect husband, you'd actually listen to me once in a while. But no. Tyler's too busy being the martyr to notice his wife isn't happy. I stared at her, the woman I thought I knew, and realized there was no saving this. Whatever we'd built was already ashes. Without another word, I turned and walked out, leaving her standing there with that same smug smile that haunted me long after I closed the door that I drove. No destination, no plan, just the hum of the engine and the road stretching out in front of me. Jessica's words swirled in my mind, a toxic brew of anger, disbelief, and something dangerously close to despair. He treated me better in 6 months than you have in 6 years. It wasn't just the cruelty of it. It was the certainty in her voice, the way she said it like a fact she'd rehearsed 1,000 times. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't even pretending to be. I pulled into a gas station parking lot, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles ached. My mind was a storm of thoughts. each one louder than the last. How had I missed this? How had I let things get so far? And then I saw it. A notification on my phone. It was from our shared email account, the one we used for bills and appointments. Except this wasn't a bill. It was a hotel reservation confirmation. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. The reservation was for tomorrow night, under her name, at a 5-star hotel downtown. A room for 2. The timestamp told me it had been booked that morning, while I was at work. I should have been surprised, shocked even, but I wasn't. I'd been numb since the moment she dropped the bomb about David. Now this felt like confirmation of something I already knew. I sat there for what felt like hours, the weight of the betrayal pressing down on me. Part of me wanted to confront her right then and there, to throw the evidence in her face and watch her squirm. But another part of me, the colder, sharper part, wanted to do more. I wasn't going to be the fool she played anymore. The next day, Jessica was all smiles. She moved through the house like nothing had happened, humming to herself as she poured her coffee. "Morning," she chirped, barely glancing at me as I sat at the kitchen table. "Morning," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. She didn't notice the tightness in my tone or the way my hands gripped the edge of the table. She was too busy texting someone, probably him. "You working late tonight?" she asked casually, taking a sip of her coffee. I forced a smile. "Yeah, big project at the office. I'll probably be home late." She nodded, already turning her attention back to her phone. "Okay, don't wait up for me. I've got plans with Karen again." Karen, of course. I watched her leave, her heels clicking against the floor as she grabbed her bag and headed out the door. The second she was gone, I sprang into action. That evening, I parked a block away from the hotel, far enough that she wouldn't see my truck. I waited, my pulse racing as the minutes ticked by. At 7:45, I saw her. Jessica stepped out of her car, dressed in a black dress that hugged her figure like a second skin. She glanced around briefly, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the streetlights, before walking toward the entrance. A man followed moments later, tall, with perfectly styled hair and a suit that probably cost more than my truck. David. He didn't even try to hide it, placing a hand on the small of her back as they walked inside together. I sat there, watching them disappear into the hotel lobby, my chest tight with rage. I waited an hour before making my move. The hotel was buzzing with activity, a mix of tourists and business people milling about the lobby. I kept my head low, avoiding eye contact as I made my way to the front desk. "Hi," I said, forcing a polite smile. "I'm here to meet my wife, Jessica Parker." She checked in earlier, but I forgot the room number. The clerk, a young woman with bright red lipstick, smiled back. "Of course, let me just check." She tapped a few keys on her computer before nodding. "Room 1823. "Thanks," I said, my heart pounding as I turned toward the elevator. The ride up was excruciatingly slow, each ding of the passing floors echoing in my ears. By the time I reached the 18th floor, my hands were shaking. I didn't knock. I didn't announce myself. I shoved the door open with my shoulder, the cheap lock giving way with a loud crack. Inside, Jessica and David were frozen in place, their faces a mirror of shock and horror. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, her dress slightly rumpled. He was standing by the minibar, a drink halfway to his lips. "Tyler!" Jessica shrieked, scrambling to her feet. "What the hell are you doing here?" I ignored her, my gaze fixed on David. He was already moving, setting the glass down and raising his hands in a pathetic attempt to look innocent. "Hey man," he started, his voice shaky. "Let's just talk about this." I didn't let him finish. The punch landed square on his jaw, sending him stumbling backward into the minibar. The glass shattered as he hit the floor, groaning in pain. "Tyler, stop!" Jessica screamed, grabbing my arm. I shook her off, my chest heaving as I stared down at David. "You think you can just waltz into my life and take what's mine?" I snarled. "You think I'm going to let you get away with this?" "Tyler, please," Jessica cried, her voice desperate now. "This isn't what it looks like." I turned to her, the rage boiling over. Isn't it? Then tell me, Jess, what is this? Because from where I'm standing, it looks a hell of a lot like betrayal. Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. For once, she had no excuses, no lies to spin. I looked back at David, who was still crumpled on the floor, clutching his jaw. Stay the hell away from my wife, I spat, before turning and walking out the door, leaving them both in the ruins of their perfect little fantasy. By the time I reached my truck, the adrenaline was wearing off, leaving me numb and exhausted. I knew the fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for the first time, I felt like I was taking back control. Jessica wanted chaos. She was about to get it. The house was eerily quiet when I got back. The kind of silence that felt too loud, pressing down on me as I paced the living room. My knuckles were bruised from hitting David, and my head was pounding from the adrenaline crash. I expected Jessica to come storming in any moment, spitting venom, twisting the narrative to make me the villain. But the door stayed closed, and the hours dragged on. By midnight, I realized she wasn't coming home. I stared at the clock, the rage from earlier simmering down into something colder, something heavier. This was it, wasn't it? The point of no return. The next morning, I was sipping coffee in the kitchen when I heard the garage door. Jessica walked in like nothing had happened. Her heels clicked against the tile, her face an unreadable mask. We locked eyes, and for a moment, neither of us said a word. So, I said finally, breaking the silence, "How's David?" Jessica flinched but recovered quickly, setting her bag down on the counter. "I don't know what you think you accomplished last night, Tyler," she said, her tone cold. "But barging into that hotel like a lunatic? That was low. Even for you." I laughed, a bitter sound that echoed through the room. "Low? You're lecturing me on what's low? Jess, you've been sneaking around with another man for God knows how long, and I'm the bad guy here." Her eyes narrowed, and she crossed her arms. "You had no right to follow me. No right to... To what? Catch you in the act." I snapped, slamming my mug on the table. "You're unbelievable, Jessica. You don't even feel bad, do you? You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught." Her face hardened, her mask of indifference slipping. "You think this is all my fault? That you're some innocent victim?" "Yes," I shouted, the word ripping out of me like a roar. "I've done nothing but try to make this marriage work. And you threw it all away for some cheap thrill with a guy who couldn't even keep his own vows." Jessica's eyes flashed with anger. "You think I threw it away? You think this was easy for me? Do you have any idea what it's like living with someone who doesn't see you anymore? Who doesn't listen, doesn't care?" "Don't you dare," I interrupted, pointing a finger at her. "Don't you dare turn this into some pity party about how hard your life is. I've been here, Jess. I've been here trying to build a life with you while you've been out there, lying to my face." She glared at me, her hands trembling at her sides. For a moment, I thought she might yell back, but instead, she let out a bitter laugh. "You want the truth?" she said, her voice low and dangerous. "Fine. Here's the truth. I was done with this marriage a long time ago. But you were too blind to see it." Her words hit like a slap, and I took a step back, the breath knocked out of me. "You don't mean that," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Oh, I do," she said, her eyes cold. "You're so obsessed with playing the perfect husband that you never noticed how miserable I was. David, he made me feel alive, like I mattered. And you were just there." I felt something snap inside me, a thread pulled too tight for too long. "Then why stay?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Why drag this out? If I'm so unbearable, why didn't you leave?" Jessica looked at me like I was an idiot. "Because it was easier this way. I didn't have to explain anything. Didn't have to deal with the fallout. And honestly, I thought you'd never figure it out." The words hung in the air, sharp and cutting. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "Well, congratulations," I said, my voice trembling. "You finally did it. You destroyed everything." She didn't respond, just stood there with that same cold indifference that made me want to scream. "I want you out," I said finally, my voice breaking. "Pack your things and get out of this house. Today." Jessica's eyes widened, just for a moment, before she smirked. "You think you can just kick me out? Good luck with that, Tyler. This house is as much mine as it is yours." I clenched my fists, my body trembling with anger. "I'll call a lawyer," I said through gritted teeth. "I'll fight you for every inch of this place if I have to. But you're not staying here, Jess. Not after this." She stared at me, her expression unreadable, before finally turning on her heel and walking toward the stairs. "Fine," she said over her shoulder. "But don't think for a second that this is over." Her words lingered long after she disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone in the wreckage of what was once my life. Jessica spent the rest of the day upstairs, making as much noise as possible while she packed. Doors slammed, drawers yanked open and shut with enough force to rattle the walls. Felt deliberate, like she wanted me to know she was angry, like she wanted to punish me for having the audacity to stand up for myself. I stayed downstairs, refusing to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. I buried myself in paperwork, scrolling through potential lawyers on my laptop, making notes about what needed to be done. I was focused now, the pain dulled by the fire of determination. She wasn't going to ruin me, not completely. By evening, the storm in the house had quieted. I heard the creak of the stairs as she came down, her heels clicking against the floor. She appeared in the doorway, suitcase in hand, her expression unreadable. "This is what you want?" she asked, her tone flat. I set my laptop aside, meeting her gaze. "I didn't want any of this, Jess. But you made your choice. Now I'm making mine." Her lips pressed into a thin line. For a moment, I thought she might argue, but instead, she laughed. A sharp, bitter sound. "You'll regret this," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "No," I said firmly. "I think I'll finally start living again." Her eyes flashed, but she didn't respond. She grabbed her keys, her suitcase trailing behind her, and walked out without another word. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the house, leaving behind an oppressive silence. For the first time in years, the house felt empty. But for the first time, it also felt like mine. The next few days were a blur of phone calls and meetings. I met with a lawyer, a sharp woman named Evelyn who wasted no time getting to the heart of the matter. "Do you want to fight for the house?" she asked, her pen poised over her notepad. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "It's not just about the house. It's about standing my ground." She nodded, her expression approving. "Good, because she's going to fight dirty. Women like her always do." Evelyn wasn't wrong. The texts started the next day. At first, they were short and spiteful. "You'll never win this. You'll be paying for this for the rest of your life." Then they turned manipulative. "I made a mistake, Tyler. We can work this out. You're throwing away everything we built." I ignored them all. A week later, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't pick up, but something told me to answer. "Tyler," a deep voice said on the other end. "This is David." I froze, gripping the phone tightly. "What the hell do you want?" "I think we need to talk," he said, his tone calm but firm. "Man to man. Man to man." I repeated, my voice rising. "You've got some nerve, calling me after everything you've done." "I didn't know she was married," he said quickly. "Not at first." I laughed bitterly. "Oh, so that makes it okay? Congratulations, David. You're just as much of a liar as she is." "I'm not trying to justify anything," he said. "But I thought you should know. She's already moved on. She's seeing someone else." The words hit me like a punch to the gut, even though I didn't want them to. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because she lied to me too," he said. "She told me you two were separated. She made me believe I was helping her escape a bad marriage. But now, I see what she really is." I wanted to hang up. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him I didn't need his pity or his explanations. But instead, I asked, "Why are you calling me now?" There was a pause. "Because I'm suing her," he said finally. "For fraud." What? I asked, confused. She took money from me, he said, his voice tight with anger. Thousands of dollars. Claimed she needed it for a new start, but she spent it all on herself. I have the receipts to prove it. I sat back, stunned. Jessica had always been selfish, but this was a new level. What do you want from me? I asked, my voice wary. Nothing, he said. I just thought you should know who you're dealing with. She's not gonna stop, Tyler. Not until she's drained you dry. I hung up without responding, my mind racing. David was right about one thing. Jessica wasn't gonna make this easy. But I wasn't the same man I was a week ago. She could fight all she wanted. I was ready. David's call lingered in my mind long after I hung up. The idea of Jessica conning him for money didn't shock me. It fit too perfectly with the woman she'd become. Still, hearing it from him, her former partner in deceit, added a new dimension to her betrayal. She wasn't just a cheater. She was a manipulator, a predator who took whatever she wanted without thinking about the consequences. That night, I didn't sleep much. I lay awake, piecing together the fragments of our life, trying to spot the moments I should have seen this coming. I realized there were too many to count. The next morning, I called Evelyn, my lawyer. I need to escalate this, I told her. Define escalate, she said, her tone sharp. I want to go after her for everything. The house, the car, whatever I can take legally, I want it. Evelyn chuckled, low and approving. Now you're thinking like a man who's had enough. Let me get to work. Jessica's response came faster than I expected. That afternoon, I got an email from her lawyer. Attached was a countersuit claiming emotional distress and financial dependency. Of course she's playing the victim, I muttered, forwarding the email to Evelyn. Less than an hour later, Evelyn called me back, her voice practically buzzing with energy. Tyler, I need you to tell me everything about your financial situation. Shared accounts, personal accounts, assets, anything you've got tied to her. I hesitated. Why? Because I've seen this play before, she said. If she's claiming financial dependency, it means she's trying to milk you for alimony. We need to prove she doesn't need it, or better yet, that she's been hiding something. That's when it clicked. Jessica's sudden interest in expensive shoes, dinners, and, God help me, the car key fob I'd found. She wasn't just cheating emotionally or physically. She'd been draining us financially, too. Over the next week, Evelyn and her team dug into every corner of our shared finances. What they found left me reeling. Jessica had opened a secret credit card account in my name a year ago. She'd maxed it out, spending thousands on luxury items, all while making minimum payments to keep it under the radar. That's not all, Evelyn said during our follow-up call. She also took out a loan against the house without your knowledge. That's fraud, Tyler. We can use this to leverage her out of your life entirely. My grip on the phone tightened. Do it. The next confrontation with Jessica wasn't planned. She showed up at the house one evening, pounding on the door like she owned the place. I opened it, and there she stood, hair perfect, makeup flawless, dressed in one of the designer coats I now knew she'd bought with my money. We need to talk, she said, her voice sharp. I stepped aside, letting her in. Make it quick, I said, crossing my arms. She wasted no time. You're dragging this divorce out, Tyler, and for what? To punish me? Because let me tell you, it's not working. I let out a humorless laugh. Punish you? Jess, I'm not even close to punishing you. Yet. Her eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? I reached for the folder sitting on the coffee table, flipping it open and sliding it across to her. Inside were copies of every financial document Evelyn had uncovered, the credit card statements, the loan paperwork, the receipts for her lavish spending. Jessica's face paled as she scanned the pages. What is this? She asked, her voice trembling. It's everything you've been hiding, I said coldly. Fraud, theft, deception. It's all right there in black and white. You thought you could get away with it, didn't you? Her mask of confidence cracked, her lips parting as she struggled for a response. This isn't what it looks like, she stammered. It's exactly what it looks like, I said, my voice rising. You've been stealing from me, Jess. You've been bleeding me dry while playing house with whoever would give you the attention you craved. And now, you're going to pay for it. Her eyes flashed with anger, and she slammed the folder shut. You think you can scare me with this? You're pathetic, Tyler. Always playing the victim. Always trying to blame me for your failures. Keep talking, I said, my voice steady. Every word you say just adds fuel to the fire. And trust me, Jess, I've got plenty of matches. She stared at me, her chest heaving with barely contained fury. For the first time, she was the one who looked powerless, backed into a corner she couldn't manipulate her way out of. This isn't over, she said finally, grabbing her bag and storming out. I watched her go, the sound of the door slamming behind her sending a strange sense of relief coursing through me. For the first time in years, I felt like I was the one holding the reins. The chessboard had shifted. Jessica thought she could control the game, but now, the pieces were mine to move. And I wasn't planning to lose. Jessica's departure that night was different. There wasn't the same air of smugness or triumph that usually followed her exits. No, this time, she left like a cornered animal, rattled and unsure. And that alone was a victory. But I wasn't done yet. Evelyn had been relentless, uncovering every stone Jessica thought she could hide behind. The secret credit cards, the fraudulent loan, all of it painted a picture of someone who'd been scheming for far longer than I wanted to admit. What I didn't expect was the email I received 2 days later. The subject line read, "For your eyes only," came from David. I opened it cautiously, half expecting some ridiculous attempt at reconciliation or justification. Instead, I found a collection of attachments, screenshots of text messages between him and Jessica. At first, I didn't want to read them. I didn't want to see her sweet-talking him the way she used to sweet-talk me, weaving the same web of lies that had kept me ensnared for years. But as I scrolled through the messages, something caught my attention. Jessica wasn't just using David for money. She was mocking me. One message read, "He still thinks I'm at yoga. Oh, it's almost too easy." Another, sent after I confronted her about her affair, said, "Don't worry about him. He's harmless. Tyler's too spineless to do anything about this." And then the dagger. "Honestly, the only thing I regret is not doing this sooner. He's a placeholder at best." The words burned like acid, each one cutting deeper than the last. I'd suspected she disrespected me, that she saw me as less than. But seeing it laid out in plain text, shared with another man as a joke, it was a new level of humiliation. I forwarded the email to Evelyn without hesitation. Her reply came within minutes. "This is gold. She's just handed us the upper hand. Let me work on this." I trusted Evelyn to use the messages strategically, but I couldn't just sit back and let the legal system do all the work. Jessica needed to know that I wasn't the man she thought she could mock and manipulate. That evening, I called her. She answered on the second ring, her tone clipped. "What do you want?" "David emailed me," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "He sent me everything, Jess. All the texts, every insult, every joke you made at my expense. I saw it all." There was a pause, just long enough for me to imagine her scrambling to respond. "So what?" she said finally, her voice laced with false bravado. "You think that changes anything?" "It changes everything," I said, my voice firm. "You've spent years lying to me, disrespecting me, and stealing from me. But now I have the proof to show everyone exactly who you are." She scoffed, but there was an edge of nervousness in her voice. "You think anyone cares? You're just trying to make yourself feel better. This doesn't make you a hero, Tyler. It just makes you pathetic." I laughed, but it wasn't out of humor. "Keep telling yourself that, Jess. But when this is all over, you'll be the one left with nothing. Not the house, not the car, not even your precious reputation." Her silence told me I'd struck a nerve. "You think you can destroy me?" she said finally, her voice trembling with barely contained anger. "I don't need to destroy you," I said. "You've already done that to yourself." The next day, Evelyn filed the updated paperwork. The messages became part of the evidence we were submitting, painting a picture of a woman who had not only betrayed her husband but also openly mocked and exploited him. Jessica's lawyer tried to push back, calling it inflammatory and irrelevant. But Evelyn was quick to shut that down. "Your client's behavior is very relevant," she argued in court. "It speaks to her character, her intent, and her pattern of deceit." The judge agreed. A week later, I got the call I'd been waiting for. Evelyn's voice was practically gleeful. "She's folding," she said. "Her lawyer reached out this morning. She's willing to settle." "What's the offer?" I asked, my heart racing. "She's giving up the house and waiving any claim to alimony. In exchange, she wants you to drop the fraud charges." I sat back in my chair, letting the words sink in. She was cornered, and she knew it. "Take it," I said after a moment. "Let her walk away. I just want her gone." "Done," Evelyn said. "I'll get the paperwork finalized." 2 days later, Jessica came to the house to pack up the last of her things. I stayed out of her way, letting her shuffle through what little was left of her presence in my life. As she was leaving, she paused in the doorway, turning to face me. For the first time in weeks, her expression wasn't one of anger or defiance. It was something softer. "Tyler," she said quietly, "for what it's worth, I didn't always hate you." I stared at her, the woman I'd once loved, now a stranger standing in my doorway. "I know," I said, my voice calm. "That's what makes this worse." She nodded, her eyes glistening for just a moment before she turned and walked out. I watched her drive away, the weight of years lifting from my shoulders as the sound of her car faded into the distance. Jessica was gone, and for the first time in a long time, I felt free. The house felt impossibly quiet in the days after Jessica left. At first, the silence was unsettling, a hollow void where chaos had once reigned. But as the hours turned into days, the quiet began to feel like something else. Peace. The morning after the settlement was finalized, I stood in the kitchen, staring at the sunlight streaming through the windows. It looked different somehow, warmer, brighter, like the storm cloud that had loomed over my life for years had finally cleared. I grabbed my coffee and headed to the backyard, taking a seat in the old chair that Jessica always hated. The garden was overgrown, the weeds choking the life out of the flowers we'd planted together years ago. I made a mental note to fix it. For the first time in what felt like forever, I had the energy to care. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of rebuilding. I threw myself into work, taking on projects I'd been too distracted to focus on before. I started running again, the simple rhythm of my feet pounding the pavement helping to clear my mind. But the biggest change was in the house itself. The master bedroom, once a shared space, now felt foreign. So I emptied it. Everything that reminded me of Jessica, her perfumes, her jewelry box, even the curtains she'd picked out, went into boxes. Some of it I donated, some I threw away. The space felt barren at first, but slowly, I began to reclaim it. New sheets, a fresh coat of paint, a bookshelf filled with novels I'd always meant to read. Bit by bit, the room became mine. Evelyn called me one afternoon, her voice as sharp as ever. "Just wanted to let you know everything's finalized. The settlement's been signed, and Jessica's officially out of your hair." "Thanks, Evelyn," I said, meaning it, "for everything." "Don't thank me," she replied. "You're the one who stood your ground. That's not easy when you're dealing with someone like her." She hung up, and I sat there for a moment, letting her words sink in. I'd spent so much time feeling like a victim, like Jessica had stolen years of my life. But now, for the first time, I realized something important. She hadn't won. I had. One evening, I found myself scrolling through my phone, deleting old photos. Images of Jessica and me at weddings, holidays, vacations, they all went into the trash. And then I found one I couldn't delete. It was from the day we bought the house. Jessica was laughing, holding up the keys, her smile wide and genuine. Back then, it had all felt so real. I stared at the photo for a long time before finally setting the phone down. Maybe it had been real once. Maybe Jessica and I had started out with good intentions, with love. But somewhere along the way, we'd lost each other. Or maybe we'd just lost ourselves. I didn't know, and I realized I didn't need to. A month later, the house was unrecognizable. The walls were painted fresh colors, the furniture rearranged, the garden blooming again. It was mine now in every sense of the word. One Saturday, as I stood in the yard, trimming the hedges, my neighbor Sarah leaned over the fence. "House looks great," she said, smiling. "You've been busy." "Thanks," I said, wiping the sweat from my brow. Figured it was time for a fresh start. She tilted her head, studying me. "You seem different." I laughed. "I feel different." "Well," she said, her smile widening, "whatever you're doing, keep it up. It suits you." As she walked away, I found myself smiling too. Not because of her compliment, but because I finally understood what she meant. Jessica's betrayal had been a storm, ripping through my life and leaving destruction in its wake. But storms clear the air. They make way for new growth. I wasn't the same person I'd been before. I was stronger now, sharper, more certain of who I was and what I deserved. And as I stood there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized something. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning.